we're not necessarily asking the supermarkets to raise their retail prices, although we do accept that's the logical outcome. What we're specifically asking for is to supermarkets to show compassion when their suppliers are seeking price increases for the price they're paid by the supermarket to reflect their increased input costs.
Yeah, okay, break down what those increased input costs are for the producers.
There's been a lot of talk about this over recent days, but obviously diesel is a huge input to farming and particularly horticulture. Row crops such as vegetables need to be planted, they need to be weeded, they needed to be harvested. Even perennial orchards such as apples and pears and mangoes need regular maintenance, and this requires tractor work, and all tractors are very hungry on the diesel. But it's also the fertiliser. The costs of fertiliser have gone up 50% in some instances, some cases even more. Horticulture requires a lot of fertiliser use to maintain good yields, but also has been often cited in recent days, the cost of fuel drives up the cost of everything. So if it's the cost of your labour getting to your farm to harvest your crop, that cost goes up, because the costs they incur in driving out to the farm to harvest the fruit goes up. So it's just one of these compounding things that drives up costs almost across the board.
Yeah, and why could it be a very long-term problem?
Well, if the costs are too great and farmers are not confident that they'll be able to reflect those increased costs in the price they get from their wholesaler or their supermarket, then the chances are that they'll have to think twice about whether they plant that crop. So we've already had some anecdotal information from our members over in WA that some of their vegetable crops are not being planted. We've had some anecdotal information from citrus growers that perhaps it's just too expensive to harvest the citrus. So what happens then is that causes, shortages that can ripple through for a considerable length of time.
Jolyon, most industries would have contingency plans for an emergency like this. Does this industry not have them?
Horticulture is a very short-term business. It's totally season dependent. So, you need to plant when it's the time to plant, you need to harvest when it's the time to harvest. It's not like manufacturing where you can delay some of the processes. You have to do it when the season dictates you have to do it. So yes, some farmers have on-farm stores of diesel. Some of them have on-farm stores of fertiliser. But I think it's very important to understand that survey after survey has shown that margins and profitability in farming in general and horticulture in particular are razor thin. And so they simply don't have the cash flow often to carry large stores of diesel or fertiliser or other input goods on farm.
Okay.
It's very much a hand-to-mouth existence for many farmers already. And if they're not allowed or able to pass on these increased costs, then that puts significant pressure on their ability to stay in business.
Jolyon, as you would expect, we've asked the two major supermarkets what they make of what's happening. I want to bring the statements that we've got from them to you. Woolworths says we need to strike the right balance of supporting the viability of our suppliers and transport partners while advocating for our mutual customers to help buffer the impact on them at the checkout. That's the interesting bit for me, buffer the impact. Looking at the Coles statement, Coles' long-term direct relationship with suppliers, including Australian farmers, means we're able to work with them to manage their own cost pressures, support continuity of supply and smooth the impact on consumers. It goes on, we are committed to providing value to our customers. Our first priority will always be to mitigate any change from flowing through to the shelf. Again, a similar phrase, but mitigate any change. It seems like the supermarkets are very aware that customers are already bearing costs and do not want to see higher prices.
Yeah. Look, I've got a few things to say there. First of all, I want to make it clear we value the supermarkets. They are an absolutely essential part of the horticultural business in Australia, and without them, horticultural growers would be in very, very difficult circumstances. So we want them in the supply chain, we need them to be profitable, we need them to stay in business and to continue to purchase. So that's important to say. Having said that, though, I think it's very clear from those two statements you've read out that there is the implication that they will be looking for their suppliers to bear the brunt of these times and these cost increases. Now, nobody wants to see the cost of food being passed on to consumers and for it to add to what is already a very tight cost of living situation. But we need to be realistic here, and that driving small businesses out of business, those businesses that supply fresh produce, that's not in anyone's interests either. So, you know, I think that one of those statements made the right comment about it being a balance. And that balance will require supermarkets to be open to growers seeking legitimate price increases where they have no other option because of the cost of producing that fresh produce have gone up. So that's all we're looking for. We're just looking for a bit of compassion and a bit of preparedness on the part of what are hugely profitable businesses. These are multi-billion-dollar businesses. And I think your listeners will understand it's not going to threaten their business viability to perhaps take a slightly smaller margin in these difficult times. They have the ability to. Small mum and dad family farms do not have the ability to tighten their margins any further.
Jolyon Burnett from the Horticultural Council, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.